Senator JD Vance exploded on live TV, but it was Jasmine Crockett's calm, ice-cold response that went viral, flipped the narrative, and changed the rules of public leadership overnight. It happened on a Wednesday night in prime time. Millions were watching. The stage was set in Dallas, Texas, a nationally televised debate on economic reform featuring prominent lawmakers. The crowd was restless. The moderator was tense. Everyone expected heated moments, but no one expected what was coming. Senator JD Vance was already 2 cups of black coffee deep, his tie slightly crooked, the corners of his mouth twitching as he adjusted his microphone. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm in a muted navy blazer, hands folded neatly, barely blinking as the cameras went live. The first half of the debate was the usual back and forth, tax brackets, inflation charts, sound bites crafted by aides. But then the conversation turned to veteran benefits, a subject that always hit a nerve. That's when Crockett struck a nerve of her own. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. She simply asked Senator Vance, "How do you explain voting against funding for the exact veterans you claim to support?" The question hung in the air, clean, precise, with the kind of weight that needs no dressing. JD Vance paused. But it wasn't the thoughtful kind of pause. It was stiff, loaded. His face tightened, and then it cracked. He snapped, "You don't get to question my integrity on this." He barked, voice rising. "I've spent more time fighting for this country than you spent reading the damn bill." The moderator tried to intervene, but Vance kept going, tone climbing. "People like you twist numbers, hide behind staffers, and throw dirt because you don't have real solutions." Crockett didn't move. She leaned slightly back, blinked once, and waited. When it was clear he wouldn't stop, she finally spoke, low and even. "And even if you screamed this loud for working families, we wouldn't be in this mess." Dead silence for half a beat. Then the room exhaled audibly. Even the moderator, who had lost grip of the room, let out a faint "okay." Moving on, as the tech director cut to commercial a few seconds early, but it was too late. The moment had already escaped the broadcast. Phones were recording. Clips were being chopped. Twitter, or rather X, lit up within minutes. The first video that went viral wasn't from an official feed. It was from a local college student sitting in the 4th row. Her shaky 14-second clip got over 3 million views by midnight. Then came the captions. When a calm read is louder than a scream. Crockett just ended Vance, without raising her voice. "This is how you handle loud men." By Thursday morning, major outlets were playing the clip on repeat. CNN slowed it down to analyze facial expressions. Fox News blasted it as a media trap. Podcasts, late-night shows, and morning radio hosts in places like Boise and Tallahassee were dissecting every frame. But it wasn't just about politics anymore. This had become a cultural moment, the way Vance had raised his voice, the way Crockett didn't match it, the way she paused just long enough for her sentence to land like a well-placed strike. At a breakfast diner in Flagstaff, Arizona, 2 veterans watched the clip on a waitress's phone. One of them, a retired Marine in a faded Oakland A's cap, simply said, "That's the difference between heat and control." It wasn't about who yelled. It was about who made their voice count. But people weren't just replaying what happened. They were asking why it happened at all. Long before the cameras rolled in Dallas, tension had been simmering under the surface, like a pot left too long on the burner. Anyone following politics could feel it. Months of closed-door clashes, passive, aggressive interviews, and not-so-subtle jabs between offices. J.D. Vance and Jasmine Crockett weren't just ideological opponents. They were 2 people who frankly didn't like each other. That was no secret on Capitol Hill. It started with a budget meeting in March, behind the heavy oak doors of room 216 in the Hart Senate office building. The discussion was meant to be routine, an internal panel on emergency funding allocations. Crockett, seated between a school superintendent from Ohio and a small-town mayor from Missouri, had pointed out a trend in the votes. "There's a pattern here," she said, pointing to the data. "Every time the issue is veterans housing or mental health support, a certain group suddenly becomes fiscally conservative." J.D. Vance didn't speak right away, but everyone saw him glance up from his tablet. No words, just that tight, practiced smirk. It would have ended there if Crockett hadn't followed up that evening with a clip on her own Instagram account. Just 10 seconds, her voice, her message. "Support isn't just a slogan, it's a vote." That line stung. It stuck, and it traveled. Weeks later, Vance was asked about it during a local TV spot in Dayton, Ohio. His response? "There's always someone trying to chase headlines instead of doing the actual work." That was the first time he mentioned her by name. Things escalated from there. During a House subcommittee hearing in May, Crockett introduced an amendment aimed at closing a loophole in military benefit disbursements. The bill stalled. Vance's name showed up on the list of senators opposing it. His office later released a statement blaming structural inconsistencies. Crockett didn't hold back. She stood on the floor with the document in hand, voice even, eyes steady. If you care about the flag, care about the people who wore the uniform. If the math isn't perfect, fix the math. Don't block the care. It wasn't the loudest speech, but it had weight. Local outlets picked it up. A few military families in Toledo began sharing it. Then a national veterans advocacy group posted the clip with a caption that read, "We've heard enough speeches. This is a call out." JD Vance stayed quiet publicly, at least for a while, but privately, his team was fuming. Emails circulated about her angle, about the media trap, and letting it blow over. Except it didn't. By early summer, Crockett was invited to speak at a roundtable in Pittsburgh with military spouses. CNN streamed it live. She didn't mention Vance, but the implication was clear. "We need fewer slogans, more service," she said. And that starts with votes that match the speeches. By the time the Dallas debate was confirmed, everyone knew it wouldn't be civil. JD Vance's team tried to control the narrative, sent pre-approved topics to producers, requesting more time for economic policy discussions and fewer personal confrontations. But Crockett's camp didn't budge. "She's not here to spar," her chief of staff told a reporter. "She's here to clarify." Behind closed doors, both teams were preparing like it was a heavyweight title fight. Vance practiced zingers and rapid-fire responses, pacing his office with a legal pad filled with rebuttals. Crockett focused on tone, pauses, timing. Not just what to say, but when to say it. There was history here, and it wasn't about one vote or one moment. It was about years of pent-up frustration between two very different public figures, representing very different communities. JD Vance came from Middletown, Ohio, steel plants, small churches, backyard fences. His rise was rooted in cultural nostalgia and working-class grit. He spoke with the voice of a man who'd seen hardship, but now played inside the corridors of Power. Jasmine Crockett came from South Dallas, urban schools, civil rights law. She moved with the weight of expectations and the pressure that came from being told constantly that she had to be perfect just to be taken seriously. So when they finally sat across from each other on that debate stage, it wasn't just two officials arguing over numbers. It was personal. But even personal fights have rules, and the moment JD broke them, everything changed. 3 hours before the cameras went live, Studio 3B at WREA-TV in Dallas felt like chaos. Wearing suits, the production crew paced with clipboards and coffee. Interns wrangled cords and barked into headsets. Staffers from both camps milled around the green rooms, careful not to make eye contact. In the hallway, everyone tried to stay professional, but there was a charge in the air, a static tension, like something was brewing that no one could name yet. Crockett arrived first, not flashy, not flanked by an entourage, just her longtime communications director, a quiet assistant named Trina, and a manila folder she refused to let anyone else carry. She wore her debate outfit under a warm-up jacket, black sneakers on her feet. She sat alone for a moment, scrolling through text messages from her mom and a few old college friends who had seen the previews. "You got this, Jazz," one said. Another simply read, "Make them blink first." Across the hallway, Vance's room was more crowded. A junior staffer reheated pizza. Someone else triple-checked the lighting setup. JD stood near the makeup table, eyes locked on a tablet, screen replaying clips of Crockett's past appearances. His campaign advisor stood behind him. "She likes to bait you with calm. Don't give her the pause she wants," the advisor said, adjusting the knot in JD's tie. "I'm not worried about her calm," JD muttered. "I'm worried about the press spin." They'd argued earlier in the car about tone. Vance wanted to come out swinging, make it clear he wasn't afraid of a fight. His team urged restraint. "You don't want to look like you're punching down," one had warned. But JD didn't see it that way. To him, Crockett's calm was a tactic, not a trait. He didn't trust it. He said so out loud downstairs. Two producers were running mic checks while studio security swept the area one more time. A younger camera operator, a guy from El Paso named Danny, glanced at his coworker and whispered, "Feels like something's gonna pop tonight." His coworker just nodded and adjusted the tripod. Meanwhile, Trina quietly knocked on Crockett's door. They want you in makeup, she said. You good? Crockett looked up, folded the manila folder shut, and stood. I've been good, she replied, just waiting for the cameras to catch up. 15 minutes before the broadcast, both candidates were ushered into a small backstage holding area. Just the two of them and the moderators, standing off to the side, reviewing last-minute cue cards. They didn't speak. Not a glance. Not a nod. But there was something in the air between them. Not outright hostility, but something colder. A studied distance as they waited in silence. Crockett turned slightly toward the stage. Arms crossed. JD stood tall, hands on his hips, shifting weight from one leg to the other. Then came the final call. A stagehand with a clipboard announced, 3 minutes. Both politicians were fitted with mics. One of the moderators leaned over to JD and whispered, keep it tight. We've got eyes from D.C. to Fresno tonight. JD gave a half nod and adjusted his lapel. He was ready, or so he thought. In Crockett's ear, Trina spoke quietly through the earpiece. Remember what you told me. Don't rise to his level. Let him fall to yours. Copy that, Crockett said, voice flat, face unreadable. When the lights dimmed for the intro music and theme graphics, everything went still. Those thick, camera-lit seconds weren't about policy anymore. They were about performance. But it was a performance neither side was fully prepared for. While Vance had rehearsed every counterpoint, Crockett had been studying silence, knowing when to pause, when to pivot, and when to hold a gaze long enough to make someone uncomfortable. She didn't need the loudest voice in the room. She needed the last word. But before that word landed, the first punch had to be thrown. And the debate was about to hand that opportunity to JD on a silver platter. The cameras blinked on. JD Vance shifted in his chair, elbows out, poised like someone waiting for a bell to ring. Jasmine Crockett, by contrast, sat still, palms resting in her lap, eyes tracking every motion across the room, as if already predicting the tempo. The moderator kicked things off with a question about rising housing costs, a soft start. Vance leaned forward and launched into a polished answer about federal overreach, building permits, and personal responsibility. It was safe. Crockett didn't react, didn't even scribble a note. Then it moved to inflation. Crockett spoke with clean. Absolutely. It's not personal, but when someone votes against helping veterans access mental health care, there's no polite way to phrase that. She didn't look at Vance when she said it, but he was already reacting. He leaned forward in his chair. Excuse me? I voted against a flawed bill, not against veterans, he snapped. You're spinning half-truths to score points with TikTok activists. Crockett finally looked at him. Which part was half-true? She asked calmly. The vote or the result? He scoffed. You want a grandstand? That's your lane. But don't you dare question my record of service. I've walked beside these men and women. I'm not questioning your service, Crockett replied. I'm questioning your follow-through. That's when JD Vance exploded. His voice rose sharply as he stood slightly in his chair, jabbing a finger across the stage, not pointed directly at Crockett, but close enough to send a message. You people sit in front of cameras and pretend you care, while you block jobs, kill progress, and run your mouths instead of lifting a finger. The moderator tried to cut in. Senator, but Vance kept going. I've had it with the Moral Superiority Act. You've never served a day in your life, and now you think you have the right to judge those who have. At this point, Crockett's expression changed. Not fear, not anger, just stillness. She waited. Let him talk. Let the room quiet down until the faint creak of the camera dolly could be heard. Then she leaned in slightly and spoke, not loud, not forceful, just clear. If you screamed this loud for working families, we wouldn't be in this mess. Silence. No one moved. Even the moderator stayed frozen, eyes darting between the two of them. Vance blinked for a split second. His whole frame slackened. He looked like he just realized something, too late to pull it back. And Crockett? She turned to the moderator, then to the camera. No gloating, no smirk, just a stillness that let the weight of her sentence hang in the air as if it had been there the whole time. The moderator finally cleared his throat and said quietly, let's move on, shifting to the next topic. But the tension lingered backstage. Trina covered her mouth, eyes wide. In Vance's green room, no one spoke. This wasn't just a debate gaffe. It was a pivot point, the second everything changed. Meanwhile, beyond the studio, something much bigger was already happening. No one inside knew just how far it would go. The studio hadn't even cut the final credits when the clip hit social media. A college junior named Raina Livingston had been sitting 2 rows behind the moderator, phone low in her lap. She wasn't supposed to be recording. But as JD Vance shouted and Crockett leaned back with that now famous stare, Raina hit record, 14 seconds. That's all it took. By the time the audience began filing out, Raina had posted the clip to her X account with the caption, "She said it without blinking." 10 minutes later, it was reposted by a popular political meme page, then by a comedian with 3 million followers, then by a veteran advocacy group. By the time Crockett was back in her dressing room, the video had cleared 1 million views. An hour later, it had tripled. By midnight, mainstream media had picked it up. The headlines varied. Some called it a smackdown. Others called it a disrespectful moment. But every outlet ran it, no matter the lean. MSNBC aired the clip every 15 minutes. Fox News ran a breaking point segment on the confrontation. And on TikTok, it exploded. Young users chopped the clip into mashups. One overlaid Crockett's line with footage of Beyoncé walking off stage. Another turned Vance's outburst into a mock rap battle intro. The memification was swift and merciless, but the serious responses carried weight. A retired Army medic named Ken Hollow from Bakersfield uploaded a video saying, "I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. If you vote against vets, don't yell about loyalty on TV. That woman said the truth plain and clean." His video hit 1 million views in just 88 hours. Even celebrities chimed in. A-list actors, late-night hosts, and a country singer from Arkansas retweeted the clip with the caption, "Real ones don't need to raise their voice." The hashtags started piling up. Hashtag Crockett Clapback. Hashtag Calm is Power. Hashtag Sir Jiv's Jasmine. Hashtag Veterans Deserve Better. While social media was frothing, both camps scrambled. JD Vance's team met in a hotel conference room past midnight. Half the staff urged him to apologize. The other half wanted him to double down, claiming he'd been provoked. JD sat quietly, replaying the moment on a tablet, muttering to himself like a mantra, "She set me up. She set me up." Back in Crockett's room, her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in from friends, former law professors, constituents, and strangers. Her chief of staff read aloud a few from voters in Arizona, Indiana, and Kansas. One said, "My daughter just asked me who that lady was. I told her, someone who didn't yell but still got heard." Crockett didn't smile. She just sat there, jacket off now, hair pulled back, sipping lukewarm water. "This wasn't supposed to go viral," she said under her breath. Trina looked up from her phone. "You think that's a bad thing?" "No," Crockett replied quietly. "But now it's no longer about the vote. It's about the tone." And that's exactly where the headline shifted. The next day, the debate about tone versus content exploded. Cable panels argued endlessly. Was JD Vance's anger righteous or reckless? Was Jasmine Crockett's calm, measured professionalism or cold political calculation? Everyone had a take. Meanwhile, almost no one was talking about veteran care anymore. On Reddit, a thread titled, "Why Are Black Women Always Expected to Stay Calm While Being Screamed At?" hit the front page. Thousands of comments poured in, some defensive, some deeply personal, others reflective. The conversation had outgrown the clip. By the weekend, it was no longer about Crockett or Vance. It was about control, about public image, about who's allowed to raise their voice and who's punished when they do. Even kids were reenacting the scene on Instagram Reels and Snapchat. The cameras shut off. The studio lights dimmed. The applause faded into hallway chatter and distant footsteps. But for JD Vance and Jasmine Crockett, the moment hadn't ended. It had just changed shape. Crockett walked out of the studio, with Trina close behind. Her blazer was folded over one arm, phone in hand, barely keeping up with the messages pouring in. One call after another, local outlets, national reporters, a cousin from Cleveland she hadn't spoken to in 5 years, suddenly wanted to talk. By the time she reached her hotel room, it was past 11. The room was quiet, the Dallas skyline glowing faintly through the window. She kicked off her shoes, sank down on the edge of the bed, and stared at her phone. One message stood out. It was from her father. "Proud of how you held yourself. Don't let them turn the noise into a weapon." She didn't reply right away. She just stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen. That one hit different. Her father was a veteran. His silence about politics had always been loud. But tonight, for once, he spoke. Meanwhile, across town, JD Vance was pacing in his hotel suite. His campaign advisor sank into the couch, shoes off, tie undone, scrolling through the coverage on his laptop. The room smelled like takeout and frustration. "They've clipped it out of context," JD said for the 4th time. "Context won't matter by morning. the advisor replied flatly. I wasn't yelling at her. I was yelling at what she represents. Media framing, cherry-picking records, playing the victim every time she gets called out. The advisor didn't flinch. She never raised her voice. That made JD snap. Exactly. That's her whole game. Let me boil over while she plays the composed martyr. There was a beat of silence before the advisor spoke again. You're not just fighting her. You're fighting the image people wanted her to be. And tonight, you gave them everything they needed. JD didn't reply. He walked to the mini bar, pulled out a bottle of water, and stared out the window, not opening it. Elsewhere, the ripple effects kept spreading. In Crockett's office, staff were split down the middle. Some were elated, seeing this as the moment she'd break into the national spotlight for good. Others were wary. They'd seen what happened to women, especially black women, who went viral for standing their ground. There was always a cost, and it came quickly. By Friday, Crockett's office had over 2,000 new messages. Dozens were threatening. Some were explicit. A few were racist bile in all caps. Trina scrolled through them with a tight jaw. You think keeping your voice down will keep things clean? Crockett, sitting at her desk, replied quietly, it never does. They don't hate the noise. They hate where it comes from. But not every message was ugly. A handwritten letter arrived from a retired social worker in Spokane. The cursive was shaky, faint, but unmistakable. I've been in rooms with loud men for 40 years. Thank you for showing my granddaughter what strength actually looks like. Crockett read that one twice. Meanwhile, across the aisle, JD's inbox wasn't much better. He had his share of hate. Some accused him of showing his true colors. Others said he'd embarrass veterans, his constituents, his party. A conservative news blog ran a piece titled, When Passion Becomes Performance. It wasn't flattering. His wife called late that night. They spoke in hushed tones. She asked, do you regret it? He paused. I regret giving her that moment. You didn't have to, she said gently. And that hit harder than anything else. Because deep down, JD knew he hadn't lost the argument. He'd lost the room. Not because of policy, not because of facts, but because of patience. Crockett, on the other hand, was doing interviews by Sunday morning. Not gloating, not spinning, just calmly repeating the same point. I don't believe in screaming matches. I believe in records. That's all I was pointing to. That's all I needed to do. But the weight wasn't gone. Now every word, every expression, every pause was under scrutiny. One wrong sentence could undo the calm she had spent years crafting. Meanwhile, beyond politics and headlines, something else was brewing. A wave of everyday people who saw themselves in that moment, now finding their voice. The clip reached everywhere, but it didn't land the same way everywhere. In a barber shop in Fresno, California, two men watched it on a mounted flat screen. One, a former warehouse supervisor named Ronald, shook his head. Man, she stayed cool. That's power. His friend leaned back in the chair. Yeah, but you know how this goes. They'll twist it, say she was smug. Meanwhile, if she had snapped back, loud, angry, you already know what the headline would be. Across the country, in a diner just outside Des Moines, Iowa, a middle-aged couple watched the clip on a waitress's phone. The husband, a retired Army mechanic, nodded slowly. She got him good, he admitted. But I don't like seeing a vet disrespected either. That man served. His wife disagreed. He disrespected himself the moment he raised his voice. Doesn't matter who you are. When you yell like that, you lose the argument. And just like that, 1,000 conversations bloom. In living rooms, cafeterias, office kitchens, truck stops. Some saw Crockett as the calm voice of reason. Others viewed her as condescending. Some saw Vance as a passionate man standing up for his values. Others watched a man unravel under pressure. But most weren't debating policy anymore. They were talking about tone. Who's allowed to raise their voice without being called unstable? Who's expected to stay calm in the face of aggression? Who's praised for fiery passion? And who's punished for silence? A school teacher in Flagstaff asked her students to write essays about the moment. Was she right? Was he wrong? One prompt read. One student wrote, they both said things, but only one stayed steady. Another said, my mom always tells me not to shout, even when people shout at me. And the lines being drawn weren't between Republican and Democrat. They were between those who believed that power came from control and those who believed it came from volume. Back in Dallas, Crockett sat with a handful of local volunteers at a community center. One of them, a teenage girl named Simone, asked quietly, do you ever feel like you're not allowed to react the way other people do? Crockett thought about it. She glanced out the window for a long second before responding. All the time, she said. But the truth is, if I react the way they do, I don't get the same second chance. Simone nodded slowly. So you've got to be perfect. No, Crockett replied. Perfect doesn't exist, but intentional. That's mine. Control is mine. Meanwhile, in Ohio, Vance was attending a fundraiser in Toledo. Someone in the audience asked about the moment. He gave a tight smile and said, I care deeply. Sometimes that shows more than it should. The room offered polite applause, but even in friendly territory, the shift was noticeable. Donors were cautious. Media questions were sharper. He wasn't being asked about tax reform anymore. He was being asked why he snapped. The clip had defined him. Crockett, by contrast, was being asked one thing. In every interview, every podcast, every guest spot. How did you not lose it? She gave different variations of the same answer, but one line kept repeating itself. You don't win just by being right. You win by being remembered for the right reason. But while the public was wrestling with the meaning of that moment, both politicians were quietly recalibrating their next moves because the stakes were about to get a lot higher. By Monday, every strategist in Washington was replaying the clip like it was game tape before a playoff. Vance's communications team met in a narrow D.C. office overlooking Massachusetts Avenue. Charts and polling shifts were taped to the walls, but no one was looking at them. They were re-watching the moment over and over, trying to pinpoint where it had gone wrong. A younger staffer finally spoke up. Maybe people aren't mad, he said. Maybe they're mad he looked like every guy who loses his cool when he's losing the argument. That didn't land well. An older advisor, gray hair and stone face, tapped a folder on the table. You're missing it, he said. This is about performance. She played it better. She let him spiral. Doesn't matter if she was right. What matters is she looked composed, and he looked rattled. They weren't talking about truth. They were talking about optics. Vance walked into the room midway through, tired and making no effort to hide it. He'd done 3 radio interviews that morning, all softball questions, and none had made him feel better. He sank into a chair, scanned the room, and said flatly, "Tell me how we take control back." But no one had a clean answer. The narrative had already slipped out of their hands. Across town, Crockett's circle was meeting in a rented townhouse they'd been using throughout her media tour. Unlike Vance's war room, it wasn't filled with papers, laptops, and half-empty coffee cups. It was quiet, deliberate. Trina spoke first. They keep trying to frame it like it was some chess. Move, like you calculated it. Crockett shook her head. They always do. If a woman doesn't flinch, it's strategic. If a man loses it, it's passionate. An intern looked up from his phone. People are asking if you baited him. She didn't laugh. I didn't have to. He brought the fire with him, and that was the core of it. JD Vance didn't lose because of the facts. He lost because he played into the very stereotype she had been trained her whole career to avoid. There's a line between genuine frustration and political theater. JD crossed it in front of millions. But here's where it got more complicated. A veteran named Ellis Graham from Scranton posted a video explaining why he'd initially sided with Vance. I know that anger. He said, I felt that anger. You come back from serving and you hear politicians tossing slogans around. You get hot. But then he paused. I also know what Crockett was doing. She wasn't mocking him. She was letting him speak for himself. And I hate that I had to watch it 3 times before I noticed she never disrespected anyone. She just didn't match his volume. That post circulated quickly, especially in veteran circles. It hit differently. It reminded people that while politicians were playing roles, the issues they argued about, veteran care, housing, mental health, were real. People were tired of political theater, tired of shouting contests where nothing ever got solved. One woman named Erica, a school nurse in Santa Fe, commented under the original clip, I don't care if you're red or blue. If you can't keep it together on live TV, how am I supposed to trust you when the stakes are real? That comment alone drew over 60,000 likes. Even inside Congress, quiet conversations started brewing. Lawmakers who had never spoken to Crockett directly sent brief emails. Simple, respectful, well done. Nothing flashy, just intentional. Meanwhile, over in Vance's world, silence spoke louder than words. A few younger GOP representatives started distancing themselves. One told a reporter off the record, JD got played, and he knows it. He let pride make a mess, and for once, no one can spin it clean. Because people had seen something too familiar, a woman being questioned, a man getting loud, She stays calm. He looks reckless. It wasn't new. It was just caught in perfect clarity. But before either side could regroup, the ripple of that moment hit an even deeper nerve, one that resonated with the quiet voters, the ones who had been watching all along. By the end of the week, the clip had stopped being just a headline and started being called the moment. Newsrooms no longer talked about the Crockett-Vance exchange. It was just the moment. Political talk shows aired the clips side by side, one frame showing Vance mid-rant, face red, hand in the air, the other showing Crockett still as stone, eyes forward, leaning in just long enough for her line to land. That line, her line. It had become political currency. Behind the scenes, conversations in both parties started to shift. A few progressive groups floated Crockett's name for bigger conversation, only sent the clip trending again. One conservative strategist admitted quietly to a colleague he didn't lose on substance. You lost on body language. Crockett, on the other hand, leaned into the moment, not by overselling it, but by underscoring its point. In interviews, she was measured, composed. She didn't gloat. She didn't make it about herself. She reminded viewers about the real issue, veteran care. Not the outburst, but the truth. And the truth was, she didn't have to say much anymore. The public was saying it for her. In Wisconsin, a group of veterans started a petition calling for lawmakers to reconsider the Veteran Resource Stability Act, the same bill Vance had voted against. They linked the clip in the header. In Albuquerque, a civics teacher rewrote her lesson plan around the debate, focusing on tone and perception in leadership. The clip became required viewing. Even campaign donors responded. Crockett's online fundraising surged, a 300% increase in under 48 hours. Small donations, $5, $10, $20, poured in from Kansas, Idaho, places where her name had never come up before. Meanwhile, Vance felt a dip, not huge, but noticeable, the kind that makes analysts circle the next poll date. Then came the op-eds. The Philadelphia Inquirer, when anger sounds like power, but fails to persuade. The Tampa Bay Times, why voters crave composure more than volume. Even Politico ran a feature titled The Cool Factor, how Jasmine Crockett reset the tone of political debate. But the backlash came too. Some accused her of weaponizing calm. Others called her cold, manipulative, the usual coded language. A few conservative outlets tried to spin silence as smugness. But when a morning host asked point blank, "Were you trying to provoke him?" Crockett didn't flinch. "I didn't provoke anyone," she said. "I answered a question." He didn't like the answer. It's that simple. And yet nothing about what came next was simple. In living rooms across the country, people weren't arguing about policy anymore. They were grappling with deeper questions. What do we want in our leaders? Is it passion? Is it control? Is it someone who speaks loudly or someone who knows how to wait their turn? More and more people weren't asking who was right in that moment. They were asking who felt like the person they could trust when pressure mounts. In Indiana, a lifelong conservative named Vince posted on Facebook, "I voted red since I was 19. But if I can't trust my guy to keep it together on live TV, how do I trust him in a crisis? I may not agree with Crockett on everything, but damn, she showed up like a leader." That post received nearly 1,000 likes. One shift in tone. One moment. That's what it became. A shift. A shift in how people see political leadership. A shift in what voters reward. A shift in who gets to be heard. And how, even as new stories came and went, as the news cycle spun forward, that moment refused to fade. It lodged itself deep into the culture, not just as political drama, but as shorthand. In group chats, people sent gifs of Crockett's reply. In corporate trainings, the clip surfaced as a lesson in de-escalation. A tech company in sand. Jose used it in a workshop about leadership and public image. Some called it overblown, said it was just television. But others knew better, because it wasn't about the policy anymore. It was about the reaction, the restraint, the difference between making a point and losing your place trying. Jasmine Crockett didn't plan to go viral. She hadn't scripted a takedown or mapped out a moment. She asked a question, and when the answer came in hot, she didn't match it. She waited. She responded once, and that one line echoed louder than the rant that came before it. That's what stuck. In an interview weeks later, when asked how the moment had changed her, she paused, really paused, and said quietly, "It didn't change me. It reminded me who's watching." And she meant it. Young women, veterans, people working too, jobs who just want to feel like someone in D.C. can keep their cool when things get hard. Because the truth is, the job isn't just about knowing the facts. It's about holding the room. JD Vance recovered in his own way. His approval ratings dipped, then leveled out. He gave a few carefully worded speeches about channeling passion more productively. His team reshuffled their messaging, tighter, more direct, less combative. 2 weeks after the debate, when a reporter asked if he regretted how it played out, he looked down for a second, then said, "I regret not being better in the moment." Not an apology, not a concession, but a crack of honesty. Maybe the first in a long while. Some forgave him, others didn't. But Crockett, she stayed steady, never made it personal, never doubled back, never felt the need to fill the space with noise. She let the moment speak for itself and kept going. It became more than a viral soundbite. It became a case study, an example of what politics more than ever needs to remember. It's not just about what you say. It's about how you say it. It's about who you are when the lights are brightest, who you are when you're provoked, who you are when you don't have time to rehearse. That's the lesson. Composure doesn't mean weakness. Calm doesn't mean retreat. Sometimes the quiet voice wins the room and leaves a mark long after the shouting stops. So if you ever find yourself in that moment, backed into a corner, someone yelling to get a rise out of you, remember what millions witnessed that night. Power doesn't always have to raise its voice. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it holds its ground. Sometimes it speaks just one sentence. And that sentence is the one no one forgets. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or reminded you of moments you've seen or felt, go ahead and subscribe. We've got more stories just like this, where the truth speaks louder than the noise.